Chapter 6. Division and Fall. History of Israel, the shattering of a kingdom. The scent of cedar lingered in the palace halls of Jerusalem. Not the sharp bite of freshly cut wood, but the warm, resinous perfume of beams that had stood for decades, polished by the hands of servants and kings. In the courtyards, the morning sun turned the golden plates of the temple into a blinding beacon. The people looked up and saw splendor. The priests saw the dwelling of their God. The politicians saw power. But beneath the gilded surfaces, the air was thick with unease. The merchants spoke of taxes that bled them dry. The elders whispered that the young king Rehoboam was not his father. The priests muttered about idolatry in high places. The sound of tension was not a shout, but a low hum, like the distant roll of thunder. The day Solomon died, Jerusalem was draped in grief and calculation. The funeral procession wound through streets, crowded with wailers, soldiers in bronze helmets, and foreign dignitaries. In the midst of mourning, eyes turned to Rehoboam, the new king, a man in his early 40s. But compared to Solomon's towering legend, he seemed untested, almost small. When the northern tribes came to Shechem to pledge allegiance, they brought a plea: lighten the load Solomon laid upon us, the taxes, the forced labor for his grand projects. Rehoboam consulted the elders, who advised mercy. But his younger counselors, eager for the taste of authority, urged him to answer with hardness. He stood before the assembly, his voice ringing in the open air. My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. A silence followed, brittle and dangerous. Then a murmur, growing to a shout. What share do we have in David? To your tents, O Israel! By sunset, 10 tribes had broken away. The once mighty kingdom, united under Saul, David, and Solomon, lay split in two. The birth of 2 kingdoms, the break was clean but jagged. The kingdom of Israel, north. 10 tribes, fertile plains, the trade arteries of the Jezreel Valley, the ports of Dor and Akko. Its first capital was Shechem, later moved to Tirzah, and finally to Samaria. The kingdom of Judah, south. 2 tribes, a rugged hill country, smaller in wealth and population, but holding Jerusalem and the temple. Jeroboam, Israel's new king, understood the danger of divided worship. If his people traveled to Jerusalem for festivals, loyalty could shift back to the house of David. His solution was audacious. He set up golden calves at Bethel and Dan, proclaiming, Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up from Egypt. The choice drew the fury of the priests in Judah and the condemnation of prophets. But Jeroboam's concern was political survival, not theological purity. In the short term, it worked. In the long term, it planted seeds of disaster. 2 paths, 1 doom. The 2 kingdoms grew apart like estranged siblings, bound by blood, divided by ambition. Israel's wealth came from agriculture and trade, but it was a kingdom of fragile thrones. Over 2 centuries, it saw 9 dynasties and numerous assassinations. Assassins could rise to the throne by sword, but rarely held it long. Judah, smaller and poorer, had a steadier monarchy, tracing each king to the line of David. Its hill country fortresses gave it some natural defense, but it was no island. The currents of Near Eastern politics pulled both kingdoms into dangerous waters. The prophets became the moral conscience of both nations. Amos roared against injustice. They sell the righteous for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. Hosea, in the north, spoke of Israel as an unfaithful spouse, beloved yet faithless. In Judah, Isaiah warned that making alliances with Egypt against Assyria was like leaning on a broken reed. It would pierce the hand. The kings often listened politely, then went back to politics as usual. The Assyrian stormed to the northeast. The Assyrian Empire was rising like a dark tide. Their armies were disciplined, their iron weapons unmatched, and their cruelty legendary. Cities that resisted were flayed, impaled, or deported. The Assyrian way was not just conquest, but transformation. Replace populations, erase identities, fold territories into the empire. In the mid-8th century BCE, King Tiglath-Pileser III began reshaping the political map. Israel, under King Pekah, joined a coalition with Aram Damascus to resist Assyria. Judah's king Ahaz refused to join, prompting Israel and Aram to invade Judah in what became known as the Syro-Ephraimite War. Ahaz, instead of trusting the prophet Isaiah's call for faith, appealed to Assyria for help. It worked, for a price. Assyria crushed Israel's allies, annexed parts of its territory, and made Judah a vassal. The fall of Samaria, 722 BCE. Israel's final king, Hoshea, tried to rebel, betting on Egypt's aid. The gamble failed. In 725 BCE, Shalmaneser V laid siege to Samaria. For 3 years, the city held out. Food dwindled, disease spread, and desperation hung over the streets. When the walls finally fell in 722 BCE under Sargon II, the Assyrians deported tens of thousands, replacing them with settlers from other parts of the empire. The archaeological layers at Samaria show sudden destruction. Burned homes, shattered pottery, arrowheads in the rubble. The northern kingdom was gone. Its people, the so-called lost tribes, vanished from political history, though their descendants would survive in scattered communities. Judah watched in fear. The prophet's warnings were no longer abstract. The fate of the north loomed like a shadow. Judah under siege, King Hezekiah, a reformer, removed pagan shrines and centralized worship in the temple. But he also rebelled against Assyria. In 701 BCE, Sennacherib's armies swept through Judah, capturing 46 fortified cities. The siege of Lachish, vividly depicted in stone reliefs in Sennacherib's palace, shows battering rams, impaled prisoners, and deportations. Jerusalem braced for its own siege. The biblical account tells of a miraculous deliverance, an angel striking down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night. Assyrian records offer a different ending. Sennacherib boasted of shutting Hezekiah like a caged bird and receiving tribute. Whatever happened, Jerusalem survived, for the moment. The Babylonian advance. A century later, Assyria crumbled under attacks from the Medes and Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar II emerged as the dominant power. In 605 BCE, he crushed Egypt at Carchemish, securing control over Judah. Jehoiakim, Judah's king, submitted but soon rebelled. Babylon returned with fire. In 597 BCE, Jerusalem fell. King Jehoiachin and thousands of elite citizens were taken into exile. Nebuchadnezzar placed Zedekiah on the throne as a puppet. The prophet Jeremiah walked the streets, urging submission to Babylon as the only path to survival. He was called a traitor. Zedekiah, swayed by false prophets and Egyptian promises, rebelled again. The final siege and destruction of the First Temple, 586 BCE. In 588 BCE, Babylonian armies returned. They encircled Jerusalem, cutting off supplies. For nearly 2 years, hunger hollowed the city. The Book of Lamentations spares no horror. Mothers boiling their own children for food, priests fainting from hunger, the streets littered with corpses. In the summer of 586 BCE, the walls were breached. Babylonian soldiers poured in, burning homes, slaughtering resistors. The temple, the pride of Solomon's reign, was set on fire. Gold melted from its walls and vessels, flowing like molten rivers. The Ark of the Covenant disappeared from history, perhaps hidden, perhaps destroyed. Zedekiah fled, but was captured. His sons were executed before his eyes. Then he was blinded and taken in chains to Babylon. Jerusalem's survivors were led away in long columns, their heads bowed under the sun. The division of the kingdom after Solomon's death weakened Israel and Judah beyond repair. Internal corruption, social inequality, and the lure of foreign alliances eroded their foundations. The prophets had warned that injustice and idolatry would lead to ruin, but the political elite saw only the next diplomatic maneuver. Assyria's conquest of Israel and Babylon's destruction of Judah were not just military events. They were the consequences of decades of political short-sightedness. Yet exile became the crucible in which Jewish identity was reforged, now centered not on a temple or a king, but on the covenant, the law, and the hope of restoration. As the smoke of the burning temple drifted eastward, the exiles trudged toward Babylon. Behind them, Jerusalem's walls were jagged black teeth against the sky. Ahead lay an alien land, strange tongues, and the bitter waters of captivity. Yet even in despair, songs were born. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. Empires believed they had erased a nation, but in the scrolls carried by priests, in the stories whispered by elders, in the stubborn memory of a covenant, a people endured. And though the stones of the temple lay in ruins, the dream of return was already taking root.